Hi, and welcome to this writing workshop for your Hero's Quest narrative. This lesson is going to talk about how to keep your paper focused. One of the most important things to do when you are editing and revising your paper is to look back at the assignment instructions. And when you look at the assignment instructions for this paper, you get very clear guidance about what information goes in which paragraph. The first paragraph needs to focus on your origins and on your call to adventure. The second paragraph should focus squarely on the test or the first challenge, or not the first challenge, but a challenge that you encountered after arriving in college. The third paragraph talks about how you moved through that challenge. It might name mentors, allies, and it will definitely describe strategies that you used. And then the fourth paragraph needs to talk only about the wisdom that you gained and how you were changed. So when you remember the instructions and look at them as you're revising, it helps you concentrate on what needs to stay in each paragraph and what might need to be deleted or maybe moved. What I'd like for you to do now is to pause this video and take a minute to read this entire paragraph. This is a paragraph that was submitted as part of a recent Hero's Quest narrative in a previous semester, and this was the student's second paragraph. So pause the video now and read this paragraph. Now that you've read this paragraph, I hope that you can see that there are chunks of the paragraph that really talk about subjects other than the challenge that this student encountered. That first yellow section is talking about before the student came to college. The section in the middle does talk about a challenge, but it's not the main challenge that this paper is about. And then the section at the end talks about what happened after the challenge. So, the first thing that you want to do, and this can be really painful, is you want to eliminate the parts of your paragraph that are not relevant to that paragraph's topic. Once this student removes those sections, this is what remains. And we have some really good information in this paragraph, some good details like what we talked about in the writing workshop on keeping your paper and making your paper crunchy and interesting. So what can this writer do next? On the left, you see the shortened version of the paragraph, and I just want to point out some different adjustments that could be made. So that very first sentence, when I decided to go to college, I was unsure about a lot of things. And then I'll keep reading. One thing I was certain about is that I didn't want to take any online classes, at least not at first. So what this writer can do is add transitions and maybe tighten the wording a little bit to sustain the paragraph's focus. So instead of when I decided to college, once I started college, that lets your reader know that now we're talking about when he begins college. Another way that transitions can be helpful is to allow your ideas to flow more smoothly. So that second sentence in the old version says, I started all my classes on campus. I was overwhelmed with balancing the schoolwork, work, and spending time with my wife and son. And here is a transition, or a version with a transition. Once I started college, one thing I was certain about is that I didn't want to take any online classes, at least not at first. So, there's your transition. I started all my classes on campus. And then here's another transition. Even then, I was overwhelmed with balancing the schoolwork, work, and spending time with my wife and son. So you can see that these transitions kind of help the ideas move smoothly from one idea to the next idea. Another section of the paper talks about when the student was sitting with his wife outside and sharing his struggles. So what happened here is that the writer just tightened those two sentences into a single sentence. Instead of my wife and I sat out on our screen porch so I could get some fresh air, we started talking about school and how much work I had to catch up on. The writer tightened it to, one afternoon, my wife and I were talking about school and how much work I had to catch up on. We really didn't need the detail about getting fresh air or sitting on the porch, because we have a lot of other details in this paragraph. So tightening the sentence into the two sentences into one sentence is helpful here. Now, even as you continue editing your paper, you want to keep watching for the details that may not fit with that paragraph's focus. So I want to draw your attention to the very last sentence. I am trying my best to stay on top of assignments and to be proactive in looking ahead to be better prepared, but it takes work. Now, right away, you can tell from the beginning of that sentence, I am trying my best, that the student is now talking about present tense. So we've shifted from the original test to what the student is doing now. So that sentence really belongs in the third paragraph, not the second paragraph. Another strategy that I want you to keep in mind is the value of reordering or moving sentences within your paragraph so that your paragraph flows more coherently and is in a more logical order. I'm going to read the whole paragraph here. Once I started college, one thing I was certain about is that I didn't want to take any online classes, at least not at first. So I started all my classes on campus. Even then, I was overwhelmed with balancing the schoolwork, work, and spending time with my wife and son. One afternoon, my wife and I were talking about school and how much work I had to catch up on. And she hit me with a bomb. She said, "Did you know that Pellissippi moved all their classes to online for the rest of the semester?" I started to feel like my goal of doing well in school was unobtainable. I was frustrated that I suddenly didn't have the in-class instruction that I felt I so desperately needed in order to be successful. I thought to myself, wow, I'm going to have to make a lot of changes if I want to do well this semester. I struggle with time management and I have poor study habits. Now, I want to draw attention to this last sentence. I struggle with time management and have poor study habits. This information really tells us more about this student's general approach to school and some of this student's particular areas of struggle. Ending the paragraph with this detail isn't the best ending, and this piece of information would actually be helpful to have earlier in the paragraph. So I want to show you what it would look like to move this sentence. What if we put this sentence in the middle? So after his wife hits him with a bomb and tells him that Pellissippi moved all their classes to online for the rest of the semester. Let's keep reading. I started to feel like my goal of doing well in school was unobtainable. Even when classes were meeting in person, there's your transition, I struggled with time management and poor study habits. After the transition, and then you get the rest of the paragraph, I was frustrated that I suddenly didn't have the in-class instruction that I felt I so desperately needed in order to be successful. Moving that sentence from the end to closer to the middle of the paragraph helps the ideas that follow make more sense. The fact that this student already struggled with time management and poor study habits helps us understand even more clearly why he felt so desperately that he needed in-class instruction. So, take a minute now and read this paragraph out loud. As you can see, it's much tighter and more focused than it was when we started. But how did we accomplish this? How did we go from this long, unfocused, and disorganized paragraph to this paragraph that is much more tightly focused? Well, we eliminated what was not relevant to the paragraph. We reordered or moved sentences within the paragraph to create a more logical flow. We added transitions to sustain the focus, and we continued watching for details that didn't fit with that paragraph's focus. So even when we found some details that didn't fit, as we continued revising, we found one or two more. Those are some wonderful strategies that you can use to help keep your paragraph, each of your paragraphs in the Hero's Quest narrative focused. Good luck on your revising and on your editing, and I look forward to reading your papers.